So hello and welcome to this NPTEL course entitled Feminist Writings, where we're looking at Christiana Rossetti's poem, The Goblin Market. So we have already had two lectures on the poem, one introductory lecture and one where we started looking at the text. So we'll just continue with this text today. So the point where we stopped in the last lecture, we saw how one of the two sisters, Laura, she partakes of this forbidden fruit of the goblin men, and the goblin men obviously described in very complex terms of being half human, half animals. And the fruits and commodities which they bring in the market, they are markers of menace, they are uncanny in quality, they're unhomely in quality, they come from different parts of the world. And we talked about how this poem can be read as a caution against unregulated, unprincipled capitalism, a caution against contaminated consumption, etc. And how the consumption becomes sexualized in quality, how the consumption becomes economic in quality, and this whole idea of mapping the financial economy and the erotic economy onto each other is something which we saw in the poem already, when especially the very symbolic scene where Laura tells the merchant man that she doesn't have any penny, she doesn't have any money to buy the commodity, and they tell her that she can just partake of the fruit by parting with a hair, parting with a lock of a hair. So the parting with a lock of a golden hair becomes a marker of surrender of sexuality, or control of your sexuality in exchange of a certain commodity, right? And that exchange becomes quite complex in quality. It's an exchange between a commodity and an erotic entity. And that's something which we see in the poem throughout. Now, we also saw at the end of the last bit where we studied the poem how when she turns back home, the whole idea of turning back towards home is associated with the loss of a sense of ownership on the knowledge around her. So she doesn't quite know if it's day or night. So she loses a sense of spatio-temporal knowledge, or spatio-temporal recognition. So the spatio-temporal derecognition of day and night is accompanied by her going back towards home. Now, at this point, we begin with that section where what happens when she goes back home, and she is admonished by her sister, the more wise sister, Lizzie. And this is what happens. And we read the poem now. Lizzie met her at the gate, full of wise upbraiding, so wise reprimand. Dear, you should not stay so late. Twilight is not good for maidens. Should not loiter in the glen, in the haunts of goblin men. Do you not remember Jenny, how she met them in the moonlight, took the gifts both choice and many, ate the fruits and wore their flowers, plucked from bowers, where summer ripens at all hours. But even in the moonlight, she pined and pined away. She sought them by night and day, found them no more, but dwindled and grew grey. Then fell with the first snow, while to this day no grass will grow where she lies low. Now, this is a very interesting example of a seemingly unimportant character, Jenny, who comes in, who was introduced in this narrative economy, this narrative design, as a conveyor of a certain kind of message, as a marker of a certain kind of message. So Lizzie tells Laura quite clearly that do not remember Jenny, what happened to her when she consumed this goblin, the fruits of the goblin men, and she used to haunt around, she used to partake of the fruits, and then what happened to her is, for example, a biological death, and this biological death is also a marker of some kind of consumption. So she got consumed away by consuming the goblin fruit. So what you consume consumes you back, is what is the message in this particular poem. So the act of consumption becomes quite loaded over here. It becomes quite symbolic in quality in the context of the goblin men. And also, if you take a look again, the space of the goblin men, they are, you should not loiter in the glen, in the haunts of goblin men. So that's where the goblin men haunt. So there is almost a prey metaphor. There's almost a invasion metaphor, which you have seen already, but also a metaphor of hunting animals, animals which are haunting the wild landscapes, and they will hunt you down if you're not careful. And then the character of Jenny, as I mentioned, is important because it is seemingly unimportant, but despite being seemingly unimportant, is actually conveying a certain kind of message. Do not remember Jenny, how she met them in the moonlight, took the gifts, both choice and many, ate the flowers, fruits, and wore the flowers, plucked from bowers. And this is an interesting bit. What the bowers come from, a place where summer ripens at all hours. So when summer ripens at all hours, so when there's always summer, it's endless summer. And this idea of endless summer, permanent summer, has a sense of perversion to it. So it's almost a perverted sense of fertility, a perverted sense of abundance, which doesn't follow the cyclicity of seasons, or the seasonal cyclicity, the natural order of seasons, so summer, winter, autumn, etc. That doesn't come at all. So this is a summer. This is a place where summer ripens at all hours. So there's a degree of pathological quality or unnatural quality about this process of ripening. Right, so it's again, and that can be connected to the modern concerns today about contaminated production practices, where a certain kind of fruit, certain kinds of vegetables are produced through very inorganic methods, through very artificial methods, and the artificial inorganic quality, whether it's dangerous fertilizer, whether it's dangerous modes of production, can then become a menace for the consumer. So among many things, this poem can also be read as a caveat to the consumer, a caveat against contaminated consumption, or the contamination which comes out of consumption, right? So it's very clearly mentioned over here, this point, that these are flowers, these are fruits which grow at places where summer ripens at all hours. They grow all the time. There's always summer over there, and that begins that makes it perverts in quality, that makes it corrupt in quality, and that if you consume it, then you consume the corruption that produces decadence in your body biologically as well as existentially. And then this is what happens to Jenny. So Jenny occurs in this narrative as a warning story, as a caveat narrative, as a caveat figure, something which a figure that appears to tell you what not to do. Right? So she pined and pined away, sought them by night and day. So she went and looked for the goblin men in search of an antidote, presumably, but then she could not find them because they disappeared. Right? Found them no more. And this is an interesting bit in the poem, because this is what I mentioned when I say that the market, the production of the market as a space, has an ad hoc quality about it. The market comes and goes, in contrast to the home, which is more permanent in quality. And that idea of not being a home is also part of the uncanny package of the market. The market is generated out of an uncanny metonymic quality and then disappears completely into oblivion, or dissolves away to some extent. So this idea of dissolution of the market, this idea of disappearance of the goblin men, is part of the menace quality that they carry with them. So found them no more, but dwindled and grew grey, then fell with the first snow, while to this day no grass will grow. So this idea of being perfectly dead, this idea of being absolutely annihilated by consuming the goblin fruit, is something which is described over here. So Jenny died in a place, Jenny is buried in a place where to this day no grass will grow. There's no regeneration out of that. So there's an absolute closure, a clinical closure that accompanies Jenny's death. Where she lies low, I planted daisies there a year ago that never blow. You should not loiter so. So, after giving this warning narrative, so it's a very interestingly embedded narrative. It's a narrative embedded within a bigger narrative, a narrative of warning. So, I planted daisies there a year ago. So this is a place where I planted daisies, but there's no regeneration which occurred there that never blow. So daisies never came to bloom, then daisies never saw the light. You should not loiter so. Nay, hush, said Laura. Nay, hush, my sister. Ate and ate my fill. So this is Laura being subversive. This is Laura, gloating in her consumption, gloating the fact that she's consumed the goblin fruit. And then, of course, we'll have a sense of fall, a sense of decadence that will be accompanied immediately after. I ate and ate my fill. Yet my mouth waters still. Tomorrow night I will buy more. So, there's a degree of intoxication about this consumption. There's a degree of addiction about this consumption. There's a degree of pathological quality about this consumption, that she says that I ate and ate my fill, but tomorrow I'm going to go back again and eat more and consume more. And kissed her. Have done with sorrow, I'll bring you plums tomorrow, fresh on the mother twigs, cherries worth getting. So you cannot think what figs my teeth have met in, what melons icy cold, pile on dish of gold, too huge for me to hold, what peaches with a velvet nap, pellucid grapes without one seed, odorous indeed must be the maid whereon they grow, and pure the wave they drink, with lilies that they bring, and sugar sweet their sap. So she is completely intoxicated and seduced by the flavor, the taste of these fruits. And she gives a narrative to the sister, Lizzie, and she says that, you have no idea, you cannot imagine the taste and flavor of the fruits that I've consumed. She talks about the plums that she will bring tomorrow. She says the cherries worth getting, the fig that her teeth have met in, and she talks about the icy cold melons pile on a dish of gold, too huge for me to hold. So this ornate quality, this ostentatious quality about these fruits is something which gives them a pathological quality, or make them a markers of menace, right? Because these are not natural organic fruits. So there's a degree of inorganic, unnatural quality about these fruits, which make them pathological, which make them a menace to consume. But at the moment, Laura is completely consumed by her consumption. She's completely intoxicated by her consumption, and she gives a narrative. She dishes out the narrative to her sister and tells her that, this is what I partake, and this is what I partook, and this is what I will partake again tomorrow, and I'll bring you back some fruits as well. And then she says, odorous indeed must be the mead wherein they grow. So the mead, the place where they grow, must be really, really beautifully smelly, fragrant in quality, and because apart from that, and how else would you explain the wonderful quality, the wonderful taste, the wonderful flavors they carry? And pure the wave, the drink, with lilies at the brink, and sugar sweet the sap. So this idea of saturated with sweetness, saturated with fertility, saturated with abundance, is precisely what gives this poem, this particular, the commodities that she partakes, a pathological quality, a contaminated quality. So the contamination becomes part of the fertility, part of the inorganic and artificial fertility of these commodities, right? That's part of the menace that this poem conveys. Okay. And then we give a description of the intimacy of the sisters, which I said, I've already mentioned that it's a very interesting kind of intimacy, because it gives you a sense of kinship, a sense of biological kinship, but there's also an erotic quality about this intimacy as well, which we will see as described in the poem. Golden head by golden head, like two pigeons in one nest, folded in each other's wings, they lay down in the curtained bed, like two blossoms on one stem, like two flakes of new fallen snow, like two wands of ivory, tipped with gold for awful kings. Moon and stars gaze in at them, wind sang to them lullaby, lumbering owls forbore to fly, not a bat flapped to and fro round their rest, cheek to cheek and breast to breast, locked together in one nest. So a lot of bird metaphors come in the description of this particular intimacy. So lie together, it's a symbol of tranquility, a scene of tranquility, a scene of absolute intimacy. But there's a lot of natural metaphors which are used to convey this intimacy, like two blossoms in one stem, like two flakes on new fallen snow, like two wands of ivory tipped with gold for awful kings. So it's a very interesting combination of natural metaphors, like snow and blossoms and stem, and also we have ivory as well, and two wands of ivory tipped with gold for awful kings. So ivory was a very common colonial merchandise, a very common colonial commodity, which often became a metaphor of greed, a metaphor of lust, a metaphor of colonial exploitation, etc. So that also enters the description, the descriptive economy in this particular point of time, and that makes it complicated as well. So moon and stars gaze in at them, wind sang to them lullaby. So the wind is singing the lullaby, the moon and stars are gazing in at them. It's all natural in the moment. Lumbering owls forbore to fly, not a bat flapped to and fro round their rest. Cheek to cheek and breast to breast, locked together in one nest. So there are two birds which are sort of huddled together in absolute intimacy in one nest. So again, this becomes a very interesting construction of a perfect home, a perfectly protective home, where Laura and Lizzie find themselves nested at this point of time. Early in the morning, when the first cock crowed his warning, neat like bees, as sweet and busy, Laura rose with Lizzie, fetched in honey, milked the cows, aired and set to rights the house, kneaded cakes of whitest wheat, cakes for dainty mouths to eat, next churned butter, whipped up cream, fed the poultry, sat and sewed. So if you take a look at his activities, it's a very domestic, idyllic activities. Fetching honey, milking the cows, kneading the cakes with wheat, churning butter, whipping up cream, feeding the poultry, and then sewing and sitting together. It's a very domestic, quote-unquote, stereotypical female activity in a household. Domestic female idyllic activity that she's partaking in, churning butter, fetching the milk from the cows, collecting honey, sitting and sewing together, etc. And then we have a continuation of this kind of an idyllic, desirable female behavior, talked as modest maidens should, Lizzie with an open heart, Laura in an absent dream. So this is the beginning of the contamination. This is the beginning of the replication of contamination, as it were. Laura in an absent dream. One content, one sick in part, one warbling for the mere bright day's delight, one longing for the night. Right? So we have a clear bifurcation over here. So what's interesting is how at the beginning, seemingly the two sisters come together, huddle together, they become one, they sleep together in a very peaceful, intimate way at the beginning, but with the following day, we have a sense of the difference between them. So they all start the day together, both of them, they carry out similar activities, fetching honey, collecting butter, collecting milk, churning butter, sitting and sewing, etc. But then at the end, by the time the stanza ends, we know that Lizzie operates with an open heart because she's completely clear and clean and pure still, whereas Laura in an absent dream. So Laura is half taken, half consumed by an absent dream, and the dream, of course, is going back to the goblins and partaking of that seductive fruit, that forbidden fruit. One content and one sick in part. So this pathological quality comes in. So there's a lot of medical metaphors which will come in as we'll examine as we move on. One content, one sick in part, one warbling for the mere bright day's delight, and one longing for the night. Right? So one is indulging in the happiness of the day, and one is longing for the night. Right? So nighttime is a time where she'll go back to the goblins, where she'll probably partake of the fruit one more time. And night, of course, is associated with darkness and evil and lack of knowledge, which makes it more menacing in quality. So night becomes a further marker of menace in the poem. And next we have the description of the slow evening. At length the slow evening came, they went with pitchers to the reedy brook. Lizzie most placid in her look, Laura most like a leaping flame. They drew the gurgling water from its deep. Lizzie plucked purple and rich golden flags, then turning homeward said, the sunset flushes those furthest loftiest cracks. Come, Laura, not another maiden lags, no wilful squirrel wax. The beasts and birds are fast asleep, but Laura loitered still among the rushes and said the bank was steep. So in the evening they went to collect water from a brook, and then when they finished collecting water, Lizzie, the more wise sister, asks them to go back quickly because she says no another maiden is around and this is not a safe place to be. But again, we have a sense of Laura loitering. And these verbs are very important in the poem. Loitering, lingering, a sense of liminality is there in these verbs. So she's about to enter, she's about to cross a threshold and about to enter a forbidden territory. She's about to enter perhaps a dangerous territory, a menacing territory. And that idea of entering a menacing space becomes important in quality. But Laura loitered still among the rushes and said the bank was steep. And said that the hour was early still, and the dew not fallen, the wind not chill, listening ever but not catching the customary cry, come by, come by. So that seductive cry comes back to her in her brain. It creeps back to her brain because that has consumed her already, even oratically. What is iterated jingle? So again, the word jingle is important because, as I have mentioned already, this is probably an allegory, a critique of the emerging industry of advertisement and the deceptive quality about advertisements, deceptive quality about jingles, where things are said but not meant, and and the process of packaging things well in words, what is actually conveyed as dangerous commodities which are sold and exoticized and sensationalized, and that idea of jingle becomes important here as well. Of sugar-baited words, again, deceptive, seductive in quality, and treacherous in quality. Sugar-baited words, not for her, all watching, once discerning even one goblin, racing, whisking, tumbling, hobbling, led along the herds that used to tramp along the glen in groups or single of brisk fruit merchant men. So again, if you look at the verbs over here, racing, whisking, tumbling, hobbling, very, very animal-like verbs, very animal-like movements, not human in quality, in groups or single of brisk fruit merchant men. Brisk, again, the word brisk is important, swift, quick, and has a sense of, again, deceptiveness about it, a treacherous quality about it, something which will outsmart you, something which is not homely in quality, something which is not domestic or reliable in quality. menacing in quality, right? So this is a point where we'll stop this lecture today, and we'll continue with the next lectures, continue the text of the next lecture. But it's important for us to understand how the landscape, even the idyllic landscape, is getting defamiliarized, is getting deterritorialized with the arrival of the goblin men, and that deterritorialization is psychological deterritorialization as well, because Laura, who is a very idyllic woman who becomes a metaphor of purity, cultural purity, hygiene, etc. And that becomes more and more seduced, by the arrival of the men who are brisk in quality, deceptive in quality. They use sugar-coated word to sensationalize things and in the process sell dangerous things, which produces idea of menace, produces economy of menace for the naive and innocent consumers around, right? So again, we look at the way in which the economic industry, the economic metaphors and the erotic metaphors combine with each other in the poem in a very interesting way. Right? And that's something which we'll continue unpacking as we move on and read the text in the following lectures. But at this point, we'll stop this poem and we'll move on, as I mentioned, in the following lectures with the subsequent stanzas. Thank you for your attention.